Hello, friends. Let's talk about what happens when de-escalation fails. First of all, for context, this video was written with the events of January 6th, 2021 in mind. Make of that what you will. This is a sit-down video, so get comfortable. This video is also only lightly scripted, so buckle up and we'll find out how long it's going to be together. I'm sitting down, I've got some tea, and we're going to be chill today. Who am I kidding? I'm American. Everybody knows how we feel about tea. This is coffee. The first thing that I want to ramble aimlessly about is the pushback I've gotten from a few fronts since I started putting these videos out, and it seems particularly relevant right now. Multiple times I've gotten comments to the tune of, this is all well and good, but it doesn't work a lot of the time, and they'll cite drunkenness or drug use or psychosis as evidence for this. This is an attitude that baffles me. First of all, I work in a hospital as a security officer, and I have for 6 years now. Who do you think I deal with? Because it ain't the folks who are inclined to follow the rules and be nice to people, tell you what. My approach to de-escalation is honed specifically on and for the people who have some barrier to their rationality. They're the people who need it the most. Lots of people have barriers to their rationality that make it hard to work with them. Strong emotions are big barriers, drug use and withdrawal, and absolutely mental illness. But here's the thing about de-escalation. Rationality comes later. Most of de-escalation actually doesn't require rationality at all because we're working with emotions. Let's take a pause here and talk about rationality because I do not want to be misunderstood. When I refer to someone as being rational, I am referring specifically to what's happening in here, matching what's happening out here. If I think one thing and I do another, that's irrational. When I lay in bed and think, I should work out today, and then I scroll Reddit instead, that's irrational. When someone says that they do not support fascism and then does not meet the very low bar of simply not acting or speaking in a way that supports fascism, that's irrational. The ethics of silence is a conversation for someone else because while I have strong opinions about the subject and everything else that I have opinions on, I'm actually undereducated on ethics in general, so I won't touch that. So in de-escalation, when I say that someone isn't being rational, what I mean is they've stated that X is their goal, but they're not acting in such a way as to bring about X. There's some more nuance than that, but that's the gist. But as we've talked about, arguing and demanding and ordering doesn't work, no matter how rational the outcome would be. Have I talked about that? Orders, yes, but the use of argument in de-escalation? Let me know in the comments if that's something that you're interested in. Anyways, de-escalation, good de-escalation, uses the emotions of the escalated person as gateways to rationality, but you have to understand and work with the emotions that are already there. So sometimes we can isolate and deal directly with an emotion by giving it a name, and when we do this, we cut through a lot of the presenting problems, and at low levels of escalation, the escalated person can engage rationally with the emotion and start acting in a way that is in concordance with their goals instead of being subverted by their own emotions. So when we jump straight to using logic and reason, well, it bounces off. Of course it does. What else is going to happen? It's like when you tell someone to calm down, like, no, and also, fuck you. Someone who isn't calm is either incapable of being calm or has decided not to be calm. So rolling in and being like, yo, everything you're doing right now, could you just not? It's not going to fly, fam. I've posted in various places many times about the specifics of why calm down is a super unproductive thing to say pretty much anytime someone says it, and I'm not going to elaborate much further here. At its core, it has a lot of the same flaws that any order does. It tells another person that you want them to replace their judgment with yours. And when you phrase it like that, it sounds super shitty. Because it is super shitty. Today was supposed to be about manipulation, but now that's next week, so hang out for more of that next time. Anyway, this is why body language and signaling and that first impression are super important for de-escalation. If you can make someone like you, then they're much more likely to believe that you're on their side. Now, this can and regularly is used for nefarious purposes by bad actors, con artists, politicians, and such, but that doesn't mean that making yourself likable is inherently bad. It's a tool like any other, and I bet you've used it too. Ever had a job interview? Or a date? Now, most people, once they've made themselves likable, that's it. If you don't have more exposure with someone, then the first impression is all you need, and if you do, then you can build that initial rapport into an actual fully rendered 1080p relationship that doesn't need signaling shortcuts in order to function. I've gotten distracted here. Refocus. Point is, the most critical elements of de-escalation work under the hood, which means that it's fundamentally an emotional process. Once you've got rapport, you can start trying to engage rationality, but you can't do that until you have that emotional foundation because it will be interpreted as manipulative. So yeah, people who think that de-escalation doesn't work on irrational people aren't using all of the de-escalation tools at their disposal. Now, this does not mean that everyone can be de-escalated, and now that we're, 7 minutes in, let's talk about that. The first thing to remember is that you are never in control of someone else's behavior. I cannot make that into a pithy hashtag for you, so you're just going to have to remember that like it's 2006 and the octothorpe is still called the pound sign. If someone does not want to be de-escalated, that's on them. You can do everything right and still have someone who escalates to physical violence, and that's on them. But that doesn't absolve you of the responsibility to de-escalate or disengage or become so boring that the escalated person no longer wants to deal with you. All of those are viable options depending on your situation, but those aren't the only options. There's a lot of possible nuance here, and I'm going to try to explain this as clearly as possible. If you want more than anything to play professional sports when you grow up, and you know that that's extremely unlikely to happen, do you stop playing your sport of choice because it's so unlikely that it'll work out for you? No. And if someone came on here and said that they were discouraging their friend from playing because it likely won't amount to anything professionally, we'd all say that that's a real dick move. Because there's lots of other benefits to playing and improving in a sport, even if it never makes you a dime. Apparently, I think that a clear explanation involves a metaphor. De-escalation is the same way. I make a lot of jokes about how annoyed other people are with me being in de-escalation mode all of the time, and I am completely overblowing that because I think it's funny. In actuality, practicing de-escalation as a discipline makes me a better communicator for everyone else. I have lots of practice with cutting past presenting problems and clarifying complicated situations and helping people set aside their counterproductive emotions and deal directly with the situation at hand. And that includes me. It makes me better able to set aside my counterproductive emotions and clarify complicated situations for myself. That's a skill set that is extremely valuable to me in everyday life, even though there are some people who I can't de-escalate. So to hear people discount de-escalation in its entirety based on the idea that sometimes it doesn't work is, I can't escape the feeling that they've already given up on something that they just aren't very good at yet. And maybe the issue is that they're trying to play baseball on the tennis court and being just baffled with why that's not working out for them. Terrible metaphor. But yeah, there is a small percentage of situations that simply cannot be de-escalated and must escalate to physical violence because disengagement isn't an option and someone's safety is at stake. And I don't know if I can make this any clearer. It is a small percentage, even in the hospital, a place where we deliberately take all of the escalated people, we put them together in one place under the most stressful circumstances. I'd estimate that maybe 5% of situations can't be de-escalated before reaching the point of physical violence. And I work in a very active urban hospital in an area with extremely high rates of homelessness, extremely high rates of drug use and abuse, and extremely high rates of unmanaged mental illness. But since there are situations where we know we aren't going to be able to escape without physical violence, we always have to make that choice. Do we become physically violent first, or do we let them? As with every other de-escalation and use of force question, the answer is, it depends. Maybe the reason lots of people don't like de-escalation is because there are no black and white, straightforward answers. A big part of being able to answer that question is knowing the answer to a completely different question. Have we done everything we can do to avoid violence and make the situation safe for everyone involved? Did we start out, before we knew that this was going to escalate to this point, did we start out with an empathetic, compassionate demeanor and the intention to build rapport? Or did we bet on behavior suppression and start issuing orders? Did we start out acting as though this is a reasonable person having a bad day? Or did we start out acting as though this person is an irredeemable asshole who could not behave more appropriately if they tried to? I bring this up a lot given the rhetoric of the last a long time in American politics where the other side is labeled as stupid, and that's that. In Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, he proposes that humans as a rule tell ourselves stories about the way the world works, and then we act in such a way as to ensure that those stories come true. Now, given our previous definition of rationality, this is perfectly rational behavior, but is it beneficial? When the story that we tell ourselves is that half the country is a collection of irredeemably violent idiots with no ability to improve, then we act as though this is the case, which ensures that it remains the case. When we've already decided that de-escalation will fail, we don't give it room to succeed. I've brought up before that I don't think that my political opposites are stupid. Yes, even after this whole fucking travesty. First of all, to dismiss them like that creates a blind spot for us, and that is very dangerous, where we do not want to engage with their actions as though they could have a larger reason or plan behind them. And then I see a bunch of people on my Facebook going, oh my gosh, we knew it was going to happen, but we didn't know it was going to be this bad. This is the reason, by the way, that left Twitter keeps bringing up the fact that Captain Genocide's first attempt at taking power was unsuccessful. They are treating their political opponents as though they are not stupid. They are looking for the larger plan and trying to prepare for it. But in doing so, they have to push back against the larger cultural story that refers to these people as Al-Qaeda, which plays on another pernicious stereotype of Southern incompetence that I'm not a big fan of. The other reason that I don't like to think of my political opponents as stupid is because it conflicts with the story that I tell myself about myself. It would be irrational for me to go around calling people who disagree with me stupid when I go around disagreeing with like everyone I know, and I'm like 80% certain that I'm not stupid. I know that when I fall hard for a big idea, it's because it feels good to me. It helps me find purpose or resolves a mystery or makes me happy. And to be clear, I've worked for an MLM, I've been suckered into religion, I've dived into hobbies that didn't really suit me and spent thousands of dollars on things I didn't need because I thought it would bring me friends. I am the sucker born that minute. And I'm reasonably confident when I extrapolate my experiences with what I've observed in others and say that people who end up in extreme positions don't do so because of any intellectual weaknesses. It's because of emotional weaknesses, which is just a really long way of saying that I don't agree with dismissing people as stupid. But people with emotional weaknesses are way more likely to become physically violent no matter what we do. And so those are the people that we need to worry about because strong emotions are a big barrier to rationality, and physical violence is rarely a rational action. All of this, it does inform the answer to that question. Do we become physically violent in the hopes of preventing greater violence, risking escalating the situation to that level when it wasn't going to get there? Or do we wait for them to become violent so that we can react with more knowledge about how much force is necessary and risk harm to the escalated person's target? Because if we did everything that we can, then we can engage cautiously because we can afford to. If we've done everything that we can, then we've either built good rapport or established consequences or both, and it's totally reasonable to act within the bounds that we've already laid out. But if we didn't de-escalate, or rarely we didn't have time to de-escalate, then we can't really wait to see what they're going to do. We can't afford to. We didn't have or find the time necessary to get enough information to make a safe decision. So now, if we choose to engage at all, which we don't have to, and in political situations, non-engagement is the default choice, now if we do want to engage, behavior suppression is the only remaining way to go. Since we didn't bother to do any groundwork, we must now act with such overwhelming force so as to establish that there can be no counter-argument to ensure that future escalation from the other party is cast as futile before it begins. And at this point, if you're confused about which side I'm on, please understand that that's because I'm talking about a very basic exchange of information and authority that is used by everybody all of the time. It's useful at work when you want your coworker to change the radio station, and it's useful when an entire arm of a political party is acting to destroy the nature of the country that I live in. The primary differences are scale and speed. One person moves very fast and can only do so much. If they move slowly, they can do much more. More people can only move so fast, and if they move slower, they can do even more. Wednesday was the end result of centuries of millions of people refusing to de-escalate, instead dismissing those who disagree with them as stupid, and mistaking a willingness to see the other side as flaccid centrism. And now both sides, because now there's sides, didn't used to be distinct sides like this, but both sides are convinced that the other side is so dangerous that behavior suppression is the only option. De-escalation has failed us, in large part because nobody used it. So when we're talking about using force, the common wisdom is that we must use the least restrictive force that we can in order to ensure the safety of all parties. Lots of times this means verbal force, like making requests or issuing commands. Just because it's not de-escalation doesn't mean it's never necessary. Sometimes limited contact open hand is enough, like when we put an open hand on someone's shoulder or elbow to guide them. Sometimes open-handed control, like deflection or holding techniques. Sometimes closed hand, which would cover all of your impact stuff. Sometimes disabling weapons like tasers and mace. Sometimes dangerous weapons like batons. Sometimes deadly weapons like knives and firearms. You can almost always use de-escalation techniques to trade time for force, and this lowers the amount of force that is necessary, which means that that would be the best practice choice to make, supposing that someone had de-escalation training and bothered to use it. If you don't have time, as is the case when a single person or small group escalates quickly, then greater levels of force may be necessary, one of those sliding scales. The goal, however, is always to ensure the safety of everyone involved. It's not to exert power or preserve your pride. This means that if you can leave a situation, then there is no acceptable use of force, assuming that the only parties involved are yourself and the aggressor. There's lots of possible permutations of additional parties, such as protectees, teammates, or an audience, but let's stick to the basics right now. And I want to make sure that there is no mistake here. It is possible to both give people credit for their actions and still be willing to exert upon them the harshest possible consequence. It is possible to look at the insurrection and say, these people aren't dumb and they're angry about things that are reasonable to be angry about, and also believe that they are wrong and have made a deliberate and calculated decision to attempt to overthrow the government and deserve the harshest penalty that the law can leverage upon them. It is possible to believe that these people were misled by con artists, liars, and deliberate seditious agents, and also believe that they are adults who are responsible for the ultimate decision that they made to participate in an armed insurrection. It is possible to advocate for their arrest and for the imposition of consequences, and also see them as sad, lonely people whose emotional weaknesses have been exploited for the ends of a few nefarious individuals whose actions don't match up with their stated goals and who are therefore irrational. It is possible to cheer on every single arrest that is announced after the insurrection and also advocate for educational access and reform and mental health resources to decrease the chances of anyone getting sucked into dangerous extreme ideologies again. The past can't be corrected because it's already fixed, frozen in place. But if we keep telling ourselves the story that this is how those people are, then we're doomed to repeat that day. Maybe not soon, maybe not in our lifetimes, but if we don't change the story we're telling, the future looks just like the present. There are individual actors throughout the political system who clearly see the situation with a great deal of nuance, but nuance is hard to fit into a tweet, so instead we end up with divisive rhetoric from everybody. So in short, when de-escalation fails, physical violence becomes necessary as long as the goal is to preserve safety. But more often, de-escalation didn't fail, it was simply never used. Be nice until it's time to not be nice anymore. But until then, be nice. And make sure that what's happening in here matches what's happening everywhere else. And just in case my efforts to make it clear that the American left and the American right are both just as guilty of not bothering to de-escalate have left you with some confusion about which side I'm on, and just in case you actually do believe that both major political parties are functionally the same, Black Lives Matter, trans rights, defund the police, we can afford UBI, Medicare for all would be amazing for people, erase student loan debt, get the Green New Deal up and running, fix marriage and property rights for the disabled, Autism Speaks is a hate group, and take the problems of Indigenous peoples seriously and trust them when they tell you what those problems are. Sorry, I had to umbrella that one because Indigenous rights issues and problems are different from tribe to tribe here in the Americas, much less everywhere. What do you think? When does physical violence become a necessary and reasonable reaction to escalation? What does irrational behavior look like to you? When can you start to introduce rational de-escalation? Is it more productive to stick with emotional de-escalation? What techniques do you use to ensure that you're not dismissing the escalated person entirely? Put your stories, additions, or corrections in the comments. Be smart, stay safe. Bye.